Closed for the season. A Hargrove County Survival Chronicle. Marcus Webb, Day 46, Transmission Log. If you're hearing this, the ham network is working better than I expected. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 44 years old, a large animal veterinarian in Hargrove County, Indiana. And I've been transmitting this log for approximately 3 weeks from a location I keep out of the broadcast header. If you want to find me, work for it a little. I'll explain why that policy exists before the hour is up. I kept records. I want to be clear about that from the start. Dates, resource counts, behavioral observations, tactical decisions, and their outcomes. And not because I thought anyone would read them. I wasn't optimistic about that in the first week. But because I am constitutionally incapable of experiencing something significant without documenting it. My ex-wife called it a coping mechanism. She wasn't wrong. What I'm about to tell you happened over approximately 35 days. I will try to be accurate. I will try to be useful. I will not pretend that any of it was heroic because none of it was. It was methodical mostly. Lucky occasionally, ugly more than I would like. From the beginning then, the last normal thing I did was treat a horse for colic. His name was Watson, a 12-year-old quarter horse with a history of anxiety-related digestive issues and an opinion about being touched on the left flank that he expressed by attempting to put his hoof through the wall. And the radio was on. I wasn't listening to it. I was focused on Watson, talking to him in the voice I use for all large animals in distress, low even, slightly boring by design, and running through the standard diagnostic sequence. Temperature, gut sounds, pain response. The radio played to the empty room. It cut mid-sentence, not to static, not to emergency broadcast tones, just silence. One moment the morning agricultural report, the next nothing. Watson shifted. I noted the silence the way you note a smell that's slightly wrong and then don't think about it for another 30 seconds. My phone buzzed 14 times in 90 seconds. I didn't look at it. I was elbows deep in a diagnostic sequence and I had a rule about phones during examinations. A rule I enforced for everyone, including myself. And the phone vibrated its way off the edge of the cabinet and landed on the concrete floor. I didn't turn around. Then Deputy Sandra Holt's cruiser went past my window at approximately 90 miles per hour with no sirens running. No sirens was the detail. Emergency vehicles run sirens. Vehicles running from something don't. I stepped outside. My hands were still bloody from the examination. Blood from a minor laceration Watson had picked up on the fence line. Nothing serious, and I hadn't stripped my gloves yet. The air had a quality to it that I would later identify as the smell of several fires burning simultaneously about 2 miles away, though I didn't know that then. My neighbor, Doug Reeves, was lying in his driveway. Doug was 47 years old and in ostensibly good health. By which I mean he was the kind of 47 that does CrossFit 3 times a week and posts about it, and has the resting heart rate of someone 20 years younger. He had a fully stocked survivalist bunker underneath his garage that he had been building for 11 years. He had 3 months of freeze-dried food, a water filtration system, communications equipment, medical supplies, and enough ammunition to defend a small municipality. He had died of a heart attack carrying his first supply crate. His arms were still wrapped around a plastic tub labeled Emergency Protocols. On top of the tub, held in place by his right arm, was a laminated sheet of paper titled Day 1 Protocol. Item number 1 read, "Don't panic." I took the protocol sheet. I took his truck keys, which were on the ground beside him, and the truck had a full tank of gas. I had noticed this 3 weeks earlier when he filled it in the driveway and I was walking past. I had not been consciously noting his gas level. I had simply noticed, the way I notice everything, and filed it away without intending to. I had been doing this kind of filing for a long time. I would later understand that this was the difference between preparation and prepping. Prepping is intentional, purposeful, self-aware. Preparation is just a habit of observation that you don't always know you have until you need it. I looked at the smoke on the horizon. I looked at Doug's laminated sheet. I looked at item number 1. "Too late, Doug," I said. From the direction of the elementary school, something moved at the tree line. Not the movement of an animal, the wrong rhythm, the wrong pace. And a sound that I knew. Every large animal veterinarian knows it. The particular vocal response to extreme pain or extreme fear that bypasses all training and goes straight to something older. But that I had never heard from a human being before. I got in Doug's truck. Pete Garland had worked on my farm for 6 years. He was 31 years old, reliable, and had the specific competence of a person who learns things by doing them and never forgets what he learned. He knew my animals by name and temperament and medical history. He knew which of the goats would try to bite if you approached from the left and which of the horses needed to hear a voice before you touched them. Pete was what I had heard in the tree line. I saw the symptoms before I processed what they meant. Clouded eyes, not full opacity, more the gray-white film of early presentation. Fever sweat visible from 8 feet. Complete absence of the recognition response. Pete had a very specific way of acknowledging my presence that involved a slight nod and a barely perceptible relaxation of his shoulders, and that was entirely gone. In its place was the kind of focused attention I had seen in animals responding to predator cues. Pure instinct, no inhibition. The blood on my hands interested him more than my face did. I noted this. I was standing 12 feet from a man I had worked beside for 6 years, and I was noting the olfactory trigger because the observational habit doesn't stop just because the situation is extraordinary. In fact, and I would verify this later many times, the habit works better under stress. The higher the stakes, and the more clearly everything registers. I backed up slowly. I kept my voice at the same low, even register I use with spooked horses. I said Pete's name twice. The second time, something flicked across his face. Not recognition exactly, but the shadow of it, like a word you almost remember. It lasted less than a second. I reached the truck. I drove away. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Not badly, not functionally. I could drive, I could think clearly. But the physiological response was honest, and I let it happen for 30 seconds, and then I pressed both hands flat against the wheel until they stopped. There is a technique for this. I learned it in veterinary school when we first euthanized an animal, which is a procedure that requires absolute steadiness in the hands regardless of what the rest of you is doing. And I drove past the town square without stopping. Deputy Holt had established a perimeter of sorts around the war memorial. 5 traffic cones and her cruiser parked sideways. There were 4 infected individuals moving in the area and approximately 25 civilians in various stages of panic, creating noise at a volume that was going to solve the infected problem by dramatically expanding it within the next 15 minutes. I drove past at 40 miles an hour and didn't look back. I thought about where I was going, not home. Home was a house with a defensive perimeter of 0 and a water supply dependent on municipal infrastructure that would fail within 48 hours when the pump stations lost power. Not the hospital, not the police station, not the school. All the instinctive shelter choices that are exactly wrong because everyone else has the same instincts. Crowds draw infected. Crowds become infected. I thought about the Fairground. The Hargrove County Fairground sat on 47 acres 2 miles outside of town. I had been on the fair committee for 4 years. I knew the property the way I know all the properties I work regularly. Not just the visible layout, but the systems underneath it. The drainage, the power supply, the water. I had the access keys on my keyring because the committee met there monthly. 6-foot chain-link fence around the perimeter installed for crowd control. Commercial kitchen, multiple large buildings, a generator, a position far enough from town to be defensible but close enough to access on a single tank of gas. and nobody was going to think of a fairground. When the world collapses, people think of Walmart. They think of hospitals, police stations, military installations. Nobody thinks county agricultural fair. It's the wrong kind of infrastructure in the wrong direction from every instinct, which was exactly what I needed. I drove to the fairground. The main gate was 3 inches open. I had the keys. The gate being open meant someone else was already here. I sat in the truck for 45 seconds and considered this. Then I went in. Gerald Sutton was in the commercial kitchen eating a ham sandwich. He was 71 years old and had been the Hargrove County Fair superintendent for 30 of those years before his retirement 2 years prior. He had a thermos of coffee, a paper bag of food from what appeared to be his own pantry, and the specific expression of a man who has decided to wait and see. Figured someone sensible would show up, he said. There's coffee. Generator's running. Got about 6 hours on the current tank. After that, it's your problem. I drank the coffee. I started walking the property. Old Jerry, he had been called this since his 40s, a title of affection rather than age, followed me at a comfortable distance, answering my questions before I finished asking them. The drainage tunnels ran under the full property, concrete pipe 4 feet in diameter, exiting at the county drainage ditch 200 yards east. The private well, drilled in 1987 entirely separate from the municipal water supply, was in the utility building behind the livestock barns. The generator had a full propane tank, and there was a second tank in the maintenance shed. How long were you superintendent? I asked. 30 years. He paused. This place was designed to be self-sufficient for a week during the fair. Power, water, food storage. Never needed to be more than that. He paused again. Until now, I suppose. I walked through the commercial kitchen and counted the walk-in cooler capacity. I walked through the exhibition halls and noted the structural integrity. I walked to the livestock barns. The fair had been in its setup phase when the outbreak hit, and the exhibition animals had been delivered but not yet shown. 6 pigs in the show barn, 12 chickens in the poultry building. All alive, all confused, all significantly calmer than every human I had encountered today. Then I found the canning competition storage. The county fair's preservation and canning competition was one of its most popular categories. Hundreds of entries every year judged over 2 days. The competition had been scheduled to start tomorrow. The entries had been submitted. The judging had not happened. 847 jars. I stood in the doorway of the storage room and looked at the shelves. Tomatoes and green beans and corn and apple butter and pickled beets and relishes and jams of approximately 40 varieties. I ran the math without meaning to. 1,400 calories per person per day. 4 people, 94 days of supplemental food. I did not feel hopeful. I felt like a veterinarian doing triage. Here are the resources, here are the needs, here is the timeline. Work the problem. Back in the main building, I heard the radio. In it was a shortwave emergency broadcast unit, battery-powered, in the superintendent's office. A man's voice came through it with the particular warmth of someone who has been trained to project calm authority in emergency situations. He identified himself as Dale Pryor, Hargrove County Emergency Management Coordinator. He asked all survivors to broadcast their location and resource status. I listened to the entire broadcast. Then I turned the radio off. I took out my notebook and I wrote down exactly what Dale Pryor had said, word for word. Then I drew a circle around 2 phrases. The first, your location. The second, resource status. I did not know why I was circling these phrases. I had a feeling that was not quite suspicion and not quite certainty, and the same feeling I get when an animal's symptoms don't quite fit the most obvious diagnosis. It filed itself away. I left it there. Old Jerry read over my shoulder. Not going to answer? I said, not yet. He nodded as if this were exactly what he had expected. More coffee? Renata Kowalski came over the fence the next morning. I heard the chain link rattle from across the property and found her at the east section with a toolbox in one hand and a shotgun in the other, having cleared the 6-foot fence with enough momentum that she'd made it look easy. Her truck, she explained, had died on the county road outside. She looked at the gate. She looked at me. You locked it from the inside while you were in here. Yes, I said, and she studied the property for approximately 8 seconds with the rapid assessment of a person who evaluates mechanical systems for a living. Then she said, "The generator is running wrong. Carbon buildup in the exhaust valve. You've got maybe 4 hours before it seizes." She walked toward the maintenance building. "Show me the fuel situation." She did not say the Fairground was a good choice, but she started fixing the generator, which communicated the same thing more efficiently. Ren Kowalski was 39 years old and had been a mechanic since she was 17, starting at her father's garage and eventually running her own. She was also a volunteer EMT, which she mentioned only when she needed to establish medical authority. She had a brother named Kevin who lived 12 miles away and with whom she had not been in contact since the previous afternoon. I spent day 2 on 3 priorities in order. First, test the well pump. The electric pump needed power we couldn't spare, so I rigged a manual alternative from the tractor's power takeoff shaft. A mechanical connection I had used before for different purposes on farms. It worked. Ren, who had come to assess the rig with professional skepticism, stood back after it produced water and said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, "That's disgusting, that actually works." Second priority, walk the full perimeter and map every weak point. I found 11 sections where the chain link had been strained over the years. 3 corners where the fence met the ground at angles that left gaps, and in 2 gate hinges that would need reinforcement within a week. I noted all of it. Third, move my clinic animals to the Fairground barns. 2 horses, 4 goats, and the specific moral weight of having chosen the horses and goats over the dog I had given my ex-wife 3 years ago in the divorce. I did not dwell on this. I was in the middle of a supply run when Ren found me. "Kevin's not answering," she said. "I'm going." I ran the risk assessment quickly and honestly. 12 miles, the county road network. The current density of infected in the areas we would have to cross. Fuel consumption versus return probability. "I can't recommend that," I said. "The math doesn't—" "I know the math," she said. "I'm still going." We argued, not briefly, not cleanly. Ren Kowalski argues the way she works, directly without ornamentation, in with a specific focus on the weakest point in your position. My weakest point was that I was calculating the value of her survival against the value of the attempt itself, and that calculation assumed her brother was already dead, which I did not know. She said this. I could not counter it. She went. She took the motorcycle from the equipment storage shed and she left at 11 in the morning. She returned at 2:15 in the afternoon. Alone. She came through the gate without the motorcycle and walked past me toward the maintenance building. I did not ask. She sat on the concrete floor inside and did not come out for 40 minutes. I did not ask. Some information transmits perfectly through silence. I logged what I understood. 1 person who did not return, 1 person who did, and 1 person who was now here in a way that was different from before. The rest was hers. We worked until dark without speaking of it. That was the right thing. By day 4, the Fairground had a shape. Ren had replaced the generator's exhaust valve and identified a biofuel modification that would let us run it on a mixture of cooking oil and distilled alcohol. The craft beer competition tent had been fully stocked for judging, and she had identified the specific bottles that could be distilled effectively. The tin can alarm system on the weak fence sections was operational. I had positioned the funhouse mirrors, removed from the Midway storage building, at every blind corner of the property, creating a network of sightlines that allowed us to see around obstacles without exposing old Jerry had suggested the PA system test. The Fairground's public address system had a battery bank that still held charge. His proposal: play something through the speakers and observe the response from any infected in the vicinity. I selected Carnival of Venice, a piece that seemed appropriate in a way I chose not to examine too closely, and played it at half volume through the full speaker array. The response was immediate and nearly total. Every infected individual within auditory range moved toward the sound with the directed attention of animals following a food cue. No hesitation, no variation. They came from 3 directions and converged on the south speaker cluster and stood there, swaying slightly for the duration of the piece. Jerry: well, sorry, that's useful. I stood there for a moment and thought about what we had just learned. We had a herding mechanism. We had a precision noise source on a controllable system. We had 47 acres of space and a target point we could designate with a switch. This changed the defensive calculus significantly. Play it again, I said. It's a nice piece, Jerry agreed and pressed the button. On day 5, I found Sophie Morris hiding in the food vendor storage building. She was 11 years old, the daughter of the woman who ran the funnel cake booth, and she had been subsisting for 3 days on funnel cake mix and tap water. She was not panicked. She was hungry and dehydrated and had been waiting. Her first sentence after I confirmed I was not infected: funnel cake mix is mostly flour, sugar, and powdered milk. Even if you add water and bake it, you can make bread. How do you know that? I asked. I'm 11, not stupid. I brought her to the commercial kitchen. Jerry made her coffee. He made everyone coffee. This was simply what he did. And then she looked around the kitchen with the methodical attention of someone already solving a problem and said, "Where do you keep the yeast?" We found yeast. It was a small victory. It mattered. On day 6, I saw Tyler Breck for the second time. He was on top of the Ferris wheel. The Hargrove Star was a 60-foot traditional carnival Ferris wheel, the centerpiece of the Midway, and Tyler was in the uppermost gondola, sitting with his legs hanging over the edge with the casual comfort of someone who has spent considerable time in elevated positions. He was looking at us. Ren, standing beside me. How did he get up there? Same way he got on the school roof twice, I said. He's Tyler. Tyler Breck was 9 years old and had been the subject of 3 neighborhood meetings, 2 parent-teacher conferences, and 1 informal discussion between myself and his father about the appropriate response when a child microwaves a live frog for science. He had the specific energy of a child who is significantly more intelligent than he is disciplined, and who has found that chaos is a more efficient route to stimulation than any available sanctioned activity. His Minecraft shirt was gray with something I did not examine closely. He watched us from 60 feet up without any particular expression. I noted his position, his lack of apparent agitation, and his sustained attention. I filed it. I went back to work. And the smell-masking discovery was accidental, as most useful discoveries are. On day 3, I had been running a controlled observation at the fence line using animal marking spray from the veterinary supply I had brought from my clinic. The spray contains androstenone and several sulfur compounds primarily used to calm territorial behavior in large male animals. When I applied it to my jacket and approached the fence at a section where 2 infected individuals were present, they tracked me by sound and movement until I stopped moving, at which point their attention drifted. I backed up. I approached again. Same result. I ran the test 6 times. The results were consistent. The mechanism was olfactory interference. The infected tracked human targets by a combination of sound, movement, and a specific scent signature. And the animal marking compounds disrupted the scent component enough that stationary individuals registered as non-target. The effect had a range of roughly 15 feet and degraded under movement. It was not perfect. It was enough. Wren modified it further by adding Fairground ammonia cleaner to the compound. The resulting mixture was aesthetically challenging but functionally superior. "It smells like a farm on fire," she observed while applying it. "Congratulations, you've weaponized the concept of bad smell." I noted this in the log without the commentary. The weapon situation was addressed pragmatically. The ring toss poles from the midway game, sharpened on the maintenance shop grinder, produced serviceable spears, more accurately long-handled tools for deflecting infected at a distance, which was what we actually needed. Wren modified the 2 shotguns for shorter barrels, improving handling in confined spaces. I built a basic CO2 dart system from bicycle pump parts, copper tubing, and modified canning jar lids. The first prototype shot a dart approximately 10 feet. The third I kept. The tractor's front-end loader bucket I modified with sections of the exhibition fencing welded into a grate. This created a clearing vehicle. The tractor could push infected away from an area without direct contact, the grate preventing reach-through. Wren watched me weld the last section and said, "So your plan for the zombie apocalypse is to become a farmer?" I said, "I've always been a farmer." She thought about this and then got back in the tractor to test the steering. The resource run to the county agricultural co-op on day 9 produced seeds, fertilizer, and additional animal feed and hand tools. The long game supplies, the things that would matter in weeks rather than days. It also produced a meeting I did not expect. 3 people were inside the co-op when we arrived. Late 20s to early 30s, 2 women and a man, clearly together, clearly not from the immediate area. They were nervous in a way that was specific rather than general. Not the baseline anxiety of the post-outbreak world, but the pointed nervousness of people carrying particular information they had decided not to share. We traded. We had veterinary antibiotics they needed. They had diesel fuel we could use. They declined my oblique invitation to discuss shelter options. One of the women, late 20s, asked about my specialty. "Large animal veterinary practice," I confirmed. She went very still. "Large animal? You deal with deer? Cattle?" "Primarily cattle and horses. Some deer work for county wildlife management." She looked at the other 2. Some communication passed that I was not part of. "Okay," she said, nothing further. I drove back to the fairground with Wren, who had been watching this exchange from the tractor with the expression she uses when she has an opinion she has decided not to express yet. We were half a mile from the fairground when Tyler Breck appeared from the tree line and threw a rock at the tractor cab. Old habit, excellent aim. It hit the metal above Wren's window with a sound like a gunshot. "Tyler!" she shouted through the closed window. Tyler tilted his head. That evening, Dale Pryor's broadcast mentioned the concept of a fairground as a potential shelter location. Not specifically our location, a generic recommendation among several. I noted it. I left the radio off. Sophie designed the greenhouse in week 2. Exhibition Hall A had a roof that was approximately 30% skylights, a design feature intended to display flowers and produce arrangements during the fair. Sophie identified this on day 8, found the 4-H Club's gardening reference books in the exhibit hall storage, and appeared in the commercial kitchen the following morning with a planting schedule written on the large whiteboard we used for inventory tracking. The schedule was organized by growth cycle, sun requirement, and caloric yield. She had prioritized fast-cycle crops for early harvest and slower crops for sustained production. She had included a note, radishes in 25 days, lettuce in 30. We need the fiber. And I added yield calculations in the right margin. Wren came in, looked at the board, and added load-bearing calculations for the planting containers she would build from exhibition display materials. Nobody announced that this was what we were doing. We just did it. "Sophie, who taught you structural load calculation?" "Wren." building my own garage at 22. Sophie wrote this down. I did not ask why. The craft beer competition tent had yielded 340 bottles and cans. I allocated 200 units for antiseptic use in trading stock, 100 for morale maintenance under strict rationing, and 40 for Wren's fuel distillation project. She had identified a process that could produce a functional biofuel mixture from alcohol and rendered cooking fat, and the first batch ran in the generator for 6 hours without incident. It smelled of yeast and faintly of brisket. We are running civilization on moonshine and bacon grease, Wren said. We are running the generator on biofuel, I said. Civilization is a separate question. The Hartwell family arrived on day 11. Lisa Hartwell was 44 years old, a carpenter who had been working a renovation job in the county when the outbreak hit. Her husband Dennis was 46, worked in insurance, and had the slightly disconnected quality of a man whose competency set had not been designed for this situation, and who knew it. Their older son Caleb was 17, quiet, watchful. Their younger son Kevin was 14 and had already identified all the structural features of the perimeter fence within an hour of arrival, in which I noted as useful. Lisa I assessed correctly. Capable, practical, immediately focused on contribution rather than reassurance. Dennis I assessed as a complication but not a threat. The boys I assessed as assets. I was right about all of these evaluations and wrong about which person in the family was going to create the most significant problem. My entry conditions were 3 rules, 10 words total, and a single question. Can you follow those? Lisa said yes without asking what the rules were, which told me everything useful about her. I let them in. On the 3rd night, I was crossing the exhibition hall and I saw Caleb Hartwell standing at the radio equipment in the superintendent's office. He wasn't transmitting. He was listening to Dale Pryor's evening broadcast with a posture that conveyed something I recognized only later. The attention of someone who knows the person speaking. I watched from the doorway for 2 minutes. He wrote down several things. He turned the radio off. He went to his cot. I wrote one line in my log. Caleb Hartwell knows Dale Pryor. Determine how. I waited 3 days before addressing Caleb. The intervening time was not wasted. I was watching him, running the hypothesis against his behavior, looking for the shape of his relationship to that radio broadcast. What I found was this. Every time Dale mentioned resources or population estimates in his broadcasts, Caleb tensed. Not at the disaster information, not at the casualty reports, but specifically at the logistics questions. The questions about what groups had, even where they were, how many of them there were. I brought him to the maintenance shop on day 14 and I asked him directly, "What's your relationship to Dale Pryor?" He told me. Dale Pryor was his mother's brother. The family had been living in Dale's emergency management compound in the first days of the outbreak. They had left because Dennis Hartwell, unpredictable, nervous Dennis, whom I had written off as the low-value family member, had figured something out. 3 groups had checked in with Dale's network. Dennis had seen the radio logs. He had seen that those 3 groups had reported their locations and resource inventories and had subsequently gone silent. Not because communications failed, because they had been consolidated. Their supplies taken, their people absorbed under threat. Caleb. Dad's not good at a lot of things, he's good at patterns. He saw the pattern. I sat with this for a moment. Then, why didn't you tell us when you arrived? Because you might have sent us away. Or worse, you might have panicked and done something that brought Dale here faster. This was correct, I told him so. He didn't seem gratified by the acknowledgement. The strategic changes were immediate. Permanent radio silence on all transmission frequencies. I built a directional receiver from components Jerry found in the maintenance storage, which allowed us to monitor Dale's broadcasts without transmitting. Every light in the facility went dark at sundown. The generator noise moved to the interior of the large livestock barn. From the county road in another week, we would look abandoned. Elisa Hartwell began reinforcing the fence weak points with lumber from the fair's construction storage, working methodically from the map I had made on day 2. She worked alone, early mornings without announcement. She had been looking for a way to contribute since her arrival. This was her way. That same week, I began to understand that Tyler Breck was behaving strangely. Not strangely for an infected individual. Strangely for an infected individual of this duration. He was at the east fence. Same location, same approximate time every morning. This was territorial behavior, and territorial behavior requires memory. The ability to associate a location with a concept. I had not observed this in the other infected individuals I had tracked. I moved closer, smell masking applied, movement minimal, and I watched him attempt the gate latch. This was the 3rd time I had observed this behavior, and what struck me was not the attempt itself, but what happened after it failed. He stopped. He looked at the gate. He looked at the fence line to either side. He began moving along the fence systematically, checking sections. This was not random infected movement. This was a search pattern. I got as close as I safely could, 8 feet, with full smell masking and absolute stillness. Tyler Breck looked at me, not with hunger, with something that I would have to classify as attention if I were being precise about it. He looked at my face, not my throat. He looked for approximately 6 seconds. I said his name. Something moved through his expression. I would not say he smiled. I would not say he recognized me in any full sense. But the word reached something. He tilted his head, a gesture so specifically Tyler, so exactly the tilt he used when you said something that required processing, that I stood there for 2 seconds before I could move. I went back inside. I didn't sleep. Sophie found me at 3 in the morning writing in my notebook, which I was aware was unusual behavior but could not stop. She read over my shoulder for a minute and then asked, "Is he getting better?" "I don't know yet." "But you think he is?" I looked at what I had written. 6 pages of behavioral observations, timeline correlations, and 1 large circled word at the top of the first page that I had written without fully deciding to. Prion. "Yes," I said. "I think he might be." One of Dale's trucks drove slowly past the outer fence that afternoon. The passenger had binoculars, and they did not stop. The species specificity test began as an observation and became a conclusion that I spent 3 days trying to find an alternate explanation for before I accepted it. The goats in the south barn had access to a fenced exercise yard that abutted the outer perimeter fence. The infected individuals who gathered at our fence line, there were typically 4 to 8 at any given time, attracted by ambient sound, showed no reaction whatsoever to the goats. Not food interest, not territorial interest, complete indifference. I ran the controlled version with Ren's dog, a 4-year-old German shepherd named Bill who had been serving as an unofficial patrol animal for the inner perimeter. We brought Bill to the outer fence at a section where 3 infected were present. His arrival produced 0 response. On the infected tracked a bird that flew past 3 minutes later. They did not track the large dog pressing his nose against the fence 6 feet from them. I ran this test 6 times over 4 days. Complete species specificity. The infected responded to human scent and human movement and had 0 response to all non-human animals I tested. Not reduced response, 0. The kind of 0 that doesn't occur in natural pathogen evolution, where the host range typically has gradients, partial responses, transitional zones. This 0 was clean. I explained this to Ren in the maintenance shop. She listened with the specific quality of attention she gives to mechanical problems, full, uninterrupted, without expression until she has reached a conclusion. When I finished, she said, "English." Natural pathogens don't produce this pattern, I said. When this level of species specificity requires targeted design, someone engineered the targeting mechanism. She looked at me for a long moment. You're telling me someone made this on purpose? The on purpose is an open question. The made is not, as far as I can determine. That's somehow worse. I took out the property map I had been updating since day one. I drew a circle around the Agritech Solutions facility 3 miles north of town, a research facility that had operated in Hargrove County for 6 years on various USDA agricultural contracts. I had treated cattle from their adjacent test plots several times. I had never been inside the facility itself. I looked at the circle for a long time. That same day, in the agricultural equipment display barn, I found a promotional banner draped across the rear axle of one of the exhibition John Deere tractors. Blue and green, glossy, the Agritech Solutions logo in the corner, proudly supporting Hargrove County agriculture. I stood in front of that banner for a while. That night, Sophie found me at 3 in the morning again. This had become a pattern. I worked until I could not, and then I sat in the kitchen and wrote until my hand cramped, and Sophie would appear and read over my shoulder and ask the one question I hadn't yet answered. This time she asked, if it was engineered to target humans specifically, does that mean it behaves differently in children's brains? I looked at what I had written. I looked at Tyler's behavioral file, which now ran to 11 pages. Children's brains are different from adult brains in some very specific ways, I said slowly. Pediatric myelin is still actively forming in the 9 to 12 age range. If the mechanism of the infection interacts with myelin the way I think it does, Sophie, he might be getting better on his own. It's a hypothesis. I need more data. You need to know what it is. Yes. She went back to bed. I wrote for another 2 hours. The word prion appeared 8 times in that session's notes, each time circled, each time with a slightly different set of connections branching from it. Ray arrived on day 18 with a white handkerchief tied to his truck's antenna and parked facing out, which told me something about his confidence in the meeting's outcome. He was 42, well-fed relative to the current standard, with military surplus equipment that was too coordinated to be scavenged. Dale's people. He confirmed this within the first 2 minutes. He offered mutual aid, protection, resource consolidation. He said Dale had 23 people, secure facilities at the county courthouse, military-grade weapons from the National Guard Armory, and fuel reserves. He said they were running low on food. I spent 45 minutes asking questions. I disclosed nothing. He told me without realizing he was telling me that Dale's operation was extractive rather than cooperative. The specific language of every answer he gave was the language of acquisition, not partnership. What do you have? How many are you? What's your defensive situation? Information flows in one direction with genuine partners. This was not flowing in one direction. I sent Ray back with a polite statement of consideration and no commitments. Community meeting that evening. Divided. Lisa thought Dale might be legitimate. Caleb said no, quietly, with the specific authority of direct knowledge. Sophie said, he's not looking for allies, he's looking for inventory. I said, she's right. We went dark that night. No external lights after sundown, ever. Perimeter sound management. Activity minimized during daylight hours that would be visible from the road. Within 5 days, the fairground looked from outside exactly like what its sign said. Closed for the season. On night 22, Tyler came inside. The maintenance tunnel under the east fence, the drainage pipe that Jerry had described on day 2, had an access hatch inside the property that I had padlocked but not welded. At 5 in the morning, I came into the commercial kitchen and found Tyler Breck sitting on the floor in front of the walk-in cooler. He had his hands flat on the cooler door. He was not trying to force it open. He appeared to be listening to it. I stood in the doorway for approximately 30 seconds. He did not turn around. His posture was not the posture of an infected individual in a hunting state. No tension, no directed attention towards sound or movement. He was focused entirely on the cooler. Then he turned and looked at me. I have been looked at by a very large number of animals in distress, in pain, in confusion, and in various stages of cognitive impairment from disease or injury. I have learned to read what is behind the look, the degree of consciousness present, the specific quality of attention, even whether the animal knows where it is and what is in front of it. Tyler Breck looked at me with full presence. Not full cognition, but full presence, the sense of a mind that is here in this room aware of this specific person. He looked at the cooler. He looked back at me. I went to the cooler. I opened it. I took out a cold pack of the boiled pork that was our current protein staple, and I set it on the floor between us. Tyler ate it without moving his eyes from my face. I sat down on the floor across from him. We were about 6 feet apart. I watched him eat. He watched me watch him. After a while, I said quietly, "I know you're in there, Tyler." Not because I expected a response, because it seemed like the accurate thing to say. He threw a very small piece of pork rind at me when he was done. Old habit, I logged it. 2 mornings later, a note appeared at the outer gate, written on the back of a gas station receipt in letters that had been formed with significant effort. Agritech. They know what happened. Come alone. I left 3 sealed envelopes on the kitchen counter before I went. One for Ren, one for Jerry, one for Sophie. Each contained specific operational information they would need to continue without me. Water pump maintenance schedule, food inventory location, key security codes. Not goodbye letters. Contingency documentation. Sophie was awake when I was leaving. She read the front of her envelope and said nothing. Then, "Come back." "That's the plan," I said. Carla Watts was 29 years old and had been the junior research assistant on the Agritech team that had designed the pathogen currently killing Hargrove County. She had been in the facility with 2 colleagues since day 1. Not because she had chosen to stay, but because the facility had gone into emergency lockdown when the situation outside became clear, and the lockdown had failed in the ways that institutional lockdowns always fail. Slowly, then all at once. She met me in the parking lot of the abandoned grain elevator 2 miles east of town. She had a laptop, a thumb drive, and the specific expression of someone who has been waiting to tell someone something for 3 weeks and is not sure whether the telling will help or destroy them. I let her talk. The full technical briefing took 40 minutes. The short version: Agritech had been operating under a USDA contract to develop prion-based interventions for chronic wasting disease in white-tailed deer. Chronic wasting disease is a prion disease, the deer equivalent of Creutzfeldt-Jakob, slow and progressive and incurable and spreading through the deer population of the Midwest at a rate that was becoming an agricultural and ecological emergency. The Agritech approach was novel, an engineered prion that would spread naturally through deer populations via environmental transmission and compete with the CWD prion for the protein binding sites where CWD does its damage. Effectively, a benign infection to crowd out a malignant one. The protein binding site they had identified for this purpose was shared, structurally at the molecular level, between white-tailed deer and Homo sapiens. Nobody had caught this. The jump had not been dramatic. It had been gradual, environmental. He spread through water sources in the areas around Agritech's field test plots. The infected population represented approximately 14 months of cumulative exposure. The specific timing of the acute presentation phase was still unclear, but Carla's working hypothesis involved a threshold effect in the prion's environmental concentration. I listened to all of this with the part of my brain that processes information, and the other part that was simultaneously running implications. I had spent 20 years treating CWD in deer. I knew prion biology at a practical level that most physicians did not. I knew the binding site she was describing. I had published a paper 9 years ago on a similar structural feature in bovine spongiform encephalopathy. I was, in this specific moment, and the most useful person alive for understanding what had happened. I was also, in this specific moment, about to become the most dangerous person alive to whoever wanted this information suppressed. I was thinking about this as I left the grain elevator, which is why I was less attentive to the county road than I should have been, which is how 2 of Dale Pryor's men were able to approach from behind a barn and take my veterinary bag before I reached the truck. They were professional about it. No violence, no threats. Simply 2 men with long guns who asked politely for the bag. I handed it over. The bag contained my CO2 DART system, the full pharmaceutical kit, the modified tranquilizer delivery mechanism that was my primary non-lethal defensive option, and the one piece of equipment I had been most careful with since day one. And they took all of it. They left me my truck keys. They walked away. I drove back to the fairground. I sat in the truck for 3 minutes. I ran the inventory of what remained. 2 shotguns, 232 rounds, the spears, the CO, 2 slingshot systems, the tractor, against Dale's 23 people and military weapons. I went inside. The 3 envelopes were on the counter, unopened. Wren was at the workbench. Jerry was making coffee. Sophie was reading. I sat down. I said, "We have a problem." The replacement DART system took 4 days to build and was, by any objective measure, ugly. Bicycle pump body, copper tubing from the Fairground's maintenance supply, modified pressure valve from a propane fitting, canning jar lids hammered into rough dart cap shapes, and it fired a veterinary gauge dart approximately 30 feet with acceptable accuracy. Wren built it at 2 in the morning on night 25, and it worked on the first test, which surprised us both more than it should have. The mobile PA unit, a wagon from the Midway converted to carry a portable battery speaker system, was Jerry's idea, developed from the original herding discovery. The fixed speaker array could attract infected to a predetermined location. The mobile unit could route them with precision, creating directed movement rather than static collection. We tested it on night 26 by routing a group of 7 infected from the south fence section to the east, then north, then off the road entirely. The wagon made a squeaking noise that I added to my maintenance list. Tyler was integrated into the fairground by this point. In the specific way, that means he was there constantly, but the integration was never formally decided. He slept in the horse barn. The horses tolerated him with the equanimity that large animals show toward presences they have categorized as non-threatening, which told me something about how he registered to them on the chemical level. He appeared in the commercial kitchen most mornings before anyone else was up. He had developed a relationship with the chickens that I did not fully understand, and that seemed to be mutual. Sophie named him on day 27. She was watching him from the kitchen window as he sat in the exhibition barn with 2 of the chickens apparently parked on his feet, an arrangement he appeared to have accepted. And she said, without particular preamble, "Still Tyler." I looked up from the notebook. "Because he's still Tyler," she said. "Just different. Still Tyler." Wren, without looking up from the workbench. "That works." Jerry from the coffee corner. "Still Tyler." Testing the sound of it, nodding slightly. It went into my notes without quotation marks that day. It was accurate nomenclature. The county veterinary hospital run was day 28. High risk. The hospital was 7 miles from the fairground, which put it in the area of Dale's operation. We ran it at 4 in the morning, Wren driving with lights off for the last 2 miles. The hospital had been stripped, not thoroughly. Whoever had raided it had taken the obvious supplies, the controlled substances they knew by name, and they had missed the pediatric sedative in the pediatric ward's crash cart, which was stored under a different labeling system than adult medications. I took all of it. I also found in the large animal diagnostic wing a manila folder in the filing cabinet marked Dear Tissue Analysis, Pending. The analysis had been started 2 weeks before the outbreak. The preliminary findings noted abnormal prion behavior in the tissue samples, specifically a prion configuration that did not match known CWD presentations. The contractor was identified on the submission form, Agritech Solutions Inc., the counter-signature on the form. The supervisor authorization for the analysis to proceed was D. Pryor, Hargrove County Emergency Management. I stood in the diagnostic wing of the county veterinary hospital at 4:15 in the morning holding this folder, and I thought about Dale Pryor's radio broadcasts and when they had started and what they had asked and what they had never asked. The broadcasts had started within 4 hours of the acute outbreak phase. 4 hours. Genuine emergency management response takes 12 to 18 hours to organize minimum. Dale Pryor had been ready. He had known. Week 4. The Fairground was, by any rational assessment, a functioning operation. 12 people. We had accepted Carla's team on day 29 after their location was compromised, and their addition brought skills we needed badly. The greenhouse was 10 days from first harvest. Water security was solid, and the fence had been reinforced at every weak point Lisa had identified. Still, Tyler ate breakfast in the kitchen most mornings now, and the chickens followed him there. I had information that made all of it a target. I went up the Ferris wheel on the night of day 29. The hand crank mechanism that operated the wheel for inspection was in the base of the structure, and I had learned to use it well enough to get one gondola to the top and lock it there. I did this regularly, not always for strategic purposes, but because at 60 feet above the fairground with a 3-mile sight line in every direction, the noise of my own thinking was somewhat attenuated. I could see Dale's courthouse from the top, 3 lights on, which meant generator power. I could see the smoke of several small fires to the north. I could see the fairground below me, dark and correctly dark, a void in the lit landscape that registered as absence rather than presence. I heard movement in the gondola below mine. Tyler had come up the wheel. He was in the second gondola, sitting with his feet over the edge, which was exactly how he had been positioned the first time I had seen him up here on day 6. He had climbed the structure with the same casual precision he had always brought to elevated positions. He looked at me. In the moonlight, his clouded eyes had the flat sheen I had been tracking for 3 weeks, and I thought I could see. I was not certain. The lighting was poor. I was tired. That the density of that sheen had decreased slightly since day 1. "You know what the worst part is, Tyler?" I said, because I was thinking out loud, and he had become unexpectedly the easiest audience for this. I was right about everything: the location, the fortification, the resource plan, right about Dale, right about the species specificity, right about the prion model, right about all of it. And I may have just made everyone here a target by being right and then going to find out how right I was. What does that say about being right? He thought about this for a moment. Then he picked up a piece of loose paint chip from the gondola frame and threw it at my foot. Old habit, perfect timing, wrong amount of force for an adult, exactly right for a 9-year-old. I laughed. It was the first time in 29 days that I laughed without conscious decision. It lasted about 4 seconds and left me feeling both better and more exhausted than before. "Thanks," I said, and he looked away at the horizon. We sat up there for 20 minutes, the veterinarian and the gradually recovering zombie child, watching Hargrove County at night. The next morning, I called everyone into the commercial kitchen and told them everything. All of it. The species specificity findings, the Agritech facility, Carla's full briefing, the CWD program, the protein binding site, the counter-signature on the analysis form, what the counter-signature meant about when Dale had known, and what he had done with that knowledge. I told it the way I write case notes, sequentially, factually, without interpretation injected before the facts. Old Jerry said, "I always knew that place was trouble, too quiet for agricultural research." This was, by Jerry's standards, a lengthy emotional response. Lisa Hartwell said nothing for 15 seconds, and then my sister worked at Agritech. Full silence in the kitchen. Nobody had known this. She sat with it for a moment and then said, "She was in the building when the lockdown happened. She may still be there." Dennis Hartwell, who had said almost nothing in 2 weeks, looked at his wife with the expression of a man seeing something clearly for the first time in a long time. Sophie, after approximately 30 seconds, "So Tyler might be recovering because of how pediatric brains handle prion interference with myelin formation?" I said. "Possibly, yes," she said. "Then we need to document it properly." She went to the whiteboard and started a new section, and I watched her do this and thought that there was something clarifying about the way children approach problems. They go directly from the fact to the next question without stopping in the middle to feel overwhelmed. Ren said, "So Dale knew from day zero he's been hunting survivor groups for resources, and now he knows roughly where we are. What's our plan?" And that was the right question, which was why I had told them. So we could get to the right question together. 3 of Dale's men cut the outer fence on the morning of day 31 at 2 locations 40 feet apart and entered the property. I let them get 50 feet in. The tin can alarm system triggered at 40 feet, which meant I had approximately 8 seconds to get to the Ferris wheel before their response time would need to be managed. And I had prepared for this scenario, not this specific scenario, but the category of scenario it represented. And the preparation held. The mobile PA unit was positioned on the north end of the property, powered and loaded. I triggered it remotely via the connection Ren had built from the fair's stage lighting control system. It began playing Carnival of Venice at full volume. The infected response was as predictable as the controlled tests had indicated. They came from 3 directions, filtering through the fence gaps that Dale's men had just created. 40 seconds after the music started, Dale's 3 men were dealing with the consequences of the entry points they had made. 2 of them ran. They moved fast and they cleared the fence and they were gone. The 3rd man did not run fast enough. I watched this from the Ferris wheel, and I watched it the way I have watched animals die. Not with detachment, because detachment is a lie, but with the specific focused attention that records what happens accurately, that refuses to look away because not looking away is the only honest response available. A person died because I created the conditions that made it possible. The fact that those conditions were defensive and the person was a threat does not make the watching easier. I logged the time. Dale Pryor came on the radio within an hour. His voice was still warm, still authoritative. "We know who you are, Dr. Webb. There are several versions of how this ends. Some of them are better for you than others." I had never transmitted on the radio. This was the first time. "I know about the deer study," I said. I know about the binding site analysis dated 3 weeks before the outbreak. I know about your countersignature. I have transmitted copies of all documentation to a secondary location. If something happens to me or this facility, that documentation goes to everyone on the ham network simultaneously." A pause. "Walk away, Dale. There isn't a version where this ends better for you than it ends for us." I had not transmitted anything to a secondary location. I did not have a secondary location. This was, in the technical terminology, a bluff. 48 hours of silence from Dale's frequency. The Tyler moment happened during the fence breach, and I did not see it in real time. Sophie described it to me afterward from the position she had taken in the exhibition hall observation window. When the infected began moving through the south fence gap toward the main barn, where the livestock were, where Sophie was, where the greenhouse was, Still, Tyler appeared from the direction of the drainage tunnel and moved between the infected cluster and the barn. Not running, not aggressive. Moving the way a herding dog moves, deliberate, authoritative, using body position and noise to redirect rather than confront. He put himself between the infected and the barn, and he walked them. He walked them with the specific pressure and angle of a practiced herder toward the east fence gap, away from the buildings. Sophie. He knew where we were. He knew what he was protecting. I thought about this for a long time. Carla arrived that evening with the other 2 members of her team, 2 laptops, on a portable drive containing the complete Agritech research archive and 40 pounds of physical documentation she had been carrying in 2 backpacks for 3 days. "Dale found our location this morning," she said. "We have whatever time it takes him to organize a response." Old Jerry put 4 cups of coffee on the counter. Everyone sat down. We worked through the night. At some point in the small hours, Jerry set a padlocked key on the table in front of me. Small brass, labeled in his meticulous handwriting, "Drainage East Access." "Just in case," he said. He went back to reading the documentation. I put the key in my pocket. I hoped very much not to use it. Carla's full technical briefing lasted 6 hours. The material I already knew from our first meeting, plus everything that had been in the facility's secure servers, in the recovery data. The Agritech team had been monitoring their field test populations for 15 months. The data they had collected was comprehensive and in certain specifics entirely unexpected. In 8 to 12% of human subjects with confirmed infection, partial neurological recovery was occurring. Not full recovery. The prion damage was permanent and cumulative, but meaningful functional recovery. Return of basic self-direction, orientation, in some cases communication. The recovery cohort showed a strong correlation with one variable, age. Specifically, patients in the 8 to 12 age range showed the highest recovery rates, and the mechanism was the active myelin formation that occurs in that developmental window. The same process that allows children to recover from brain injuries that would permanently disable adults. The prion interference disrupted myelin function. The active myelin repair process in pediatric brains partially compensated. Tyler Breck was 9 years old. He was not an anomaly. He was a data point in a recovery pattern that, extrapolated, suggested that in 6 to 8 more weeks he would very likely be able to communicate in simple language. And he was, in the documented literature that Carla had brought in 40 pounds of paper, the most studied case of pediatric recovery in the available data. Because I had been documenting him since day 7, I sat with this information for a moment. Carla, you understand what this means. It means the infection is survivable for a meaningful percentage of people who are already infected. It means the public health response, whatever that eventually looks like, has a treatment pathway that doesn't start from 0. It means he's proof, Sophie said from the doorway. I had not heard her come in. He's proof that it's survivable. She looked at me. I looked at her. We both looked at the documentation. Yes, I said. The 24 hours before Dale's arrival were the most organized I have experienced in my professional life. Everyone worked in their specific domain with the efficiency of people who know exactly what they're doing and know why they're doing it. Lisa reinforced the interior of Exhibition Hall A. Wren modified the tractor's cab with additional metal sheeting. Jerry cataloged every resource with the precision of someone who had been keeping records for 30 years and was not going to stop now. Sophie backed up all data to a second drive and wrote a plain language summary document in language that anyone could understand. Carla briefed me on every remaining technical detail. I was in the kitchen reviewing the operational plan when I heard a sound from behind me. Tyler Breck had come through the kitchen door. Not the drainage tunnel, the actual door which he had apparently learned to operate. and he was standing in the middle of the room with 2 chickens behind him who had clearly accompanied him from the barn. He looked at the table. He looked at me. Sophie appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, slightly out of breath. He looked at her. She sat down on the floor, and he sat down across from her, with approximately 3 feet between them. A specific, deliberate distance, not the random positioning of an animal, but the thoughtful spacing of a social creature who has a concept of personal space. She pushed a piece of bread across the floor toward him. He picked it up. He ate it. He looked at her. I watched this from across the kitchen, and I thought, as objectively as I could think anything at that moment, which was not very objectively, that I had come to Hargrove County as a 27-year-old veterinarian with a conviction that I worked better with animals than people, and that conviction had been largely confirmed by experience, even that the current arrangement, 2 humans and 2 chickens having a breakfast interaction in the middle of a defended enclave inside a zombie apocalypse while the county's most dangerous survivor faction prepared to attack, was not something I had optimized for and was somehow the most important thing in the room. Sophie wrote something in her notebook. "Okay," I said, "let's get to work." Dale arrived at 10:17 in the evening with 4 trucks and 18 people. I was in the top gondola of the Ferris wheel with a radio, a stopwatch, and a clear view of the county road approach. I had been there since sundown. I watched the truck stop 300 yards out. I watched the deployment, 4 people per truck moving to flanking positions, professional spacing. Dale had done this before 3 times at minimum. He was good at it. I called Wren on the radio. "They're in position, 30 seconds. Ready?" she said. I turned on the Hargrove Star. The full LED array on the 60-foot Ferris wheel illuminated simultaneously, 1,000 lights going live in the flat Indiana darkness, visible for approximately 6 miles in every direction. I started the PA, full array, full volume, Carnival of Venice opening bars. The infected began arriving in 45 seconds. They came from the north first, then the east, then from the direction of town in a loose grouping that moved with the specific purposefulness that the sound always produced. Dale's flanking teams, who had been positioned between the approach road and the fairground, were now between the fairground's attracted infected and the surrounding county. This was not an accident. Half of Dale's 18 people broke contact within the first 90 seconds. They were survivors who had acquired weapons. There is a difference, and the difference manifests very specifically when 43 infected arrive simultaneously from 3 directions. The remaining 9 held. Dale was among them. He was, whatever else I thought about him, not a coward. Wren brought the tractor around from the south, not toward Dale's position but to his east, pushing a cluster of infected that had arrived too late for the primary engagement. The infected routed around the tractor's approach, which put them between Dale's remaining 9 and the county road. Not a trap, exactly. More an unfavorable geometry. 6 of Dale's 9 began to disengage, then still Tyler walked out the main gate. I saw it from the Ferris wheel, and I did not understand what I was seeing for approximately 2 seconds. Which is a long time when you are coordinating a defensive operation from 60 feet up. Tyler came through the main gate and walked into the open space between Dale's remaining 3 and the entrance. He walked to the center of that space and he stopped. He stood there. "Dale, shoot it." His 2 remaining men had long guns. They raised them. They looked at what they were pointing them at. It was a child. It was a small child in a Minecraft shirt, and it was standing in the middle of a county fairground in the dark, and it was looking at them, and it was not moving. 4 seconds. I was already moving down the first section of the Ferris wheel structure because 4 seconds was what I needed. Wren, who had seen Tyler come out the gate on the security monitor, had already redirected the tractor. By the time Dale's men had processed what they were looking at and made the decision not to shoot a child, the decision that 4 seconds of hesitation eventually becomes, Wren had brought the tractor around behind their position, and I was at the base of the Ferris wheel with the megaphone. I know about the deer study, Dale. The data's been transmitted. I told you 48 hours ago, that's still true. Whatever you do here tonight doesn't change what's already out. Walk away. Silence. I waited. Wren waited. Tyler waited, standing in the middle of the fairground entrance, and with the two chickens who had apparently followed him out the gate now standing several feet behind him. With the flustered expression of chickens who had not planned to be outdoors at this hour. Dale Pryor said, "You understand this isn't over." "I understand that," I said. "And you understand that I had reasons for the decisions I made." This was not what I expected him to say. I had expected a threat or a negotiating position. This sounded like something else. "I expect you did," I said. "Walk away, Dale." He walked away. He and his two remaining men got into one of the trucks and drove north. It was not triumphant. It was not resolved. The county was still infected. Dale was still alive and armed and angry, and none of the underlying problems had been solved. But the immediate threat had been managed, which was all we had planned for. Lisa's shoulder had been grazed by a bullet during the engagement. The wound was shallow and would heal cleanly. Wren treated it. Lisa sat through the treatment without expression, which was entirely consistent with everything I had observed about her. Still, Tyler came back through the main gate after Dale's truck had gone. He sat down on the steps of the commercial kitchen. Sophie came out and sat beside him. Neither of them said anything. The chickens redistributed themselves around the steps in the way chickens do when they have decided a location is acceptable. I logged day 36, confrontation managed, no fatalities in group, 1 injury minor. Dale withdrew. Situation, unresolved but de-escalated. Then I locked the gate because that was the next thing to do, and that was how it was. You did the next thing and then the next thing, and that was what continuing felt like. In the morning in the kitchen, before I had finished the first log entry, Tyler Breck said a word. It was not a full word. It was the approximate sound of a word, the rough form of a word shaped by a mouth and brain that were relearning the mechanics of speech. But it was unambiguous, the same syllable twice on 2 breaths. Food. Sophie, sitting across from him with her notebook open, looked up. She wrote it down. The damage assessment took 2 days. 2 fence sections needed full replacement. Lisa's shoulder was healing on the schedule Wren had projected. 1 goat had been lost in the confusion of the engagement. The CO2 dart system had taken a hit to the pressure valve and needed rebuilding. 41 rounds of ammunition expended. Generator fuel at 60%. I had not slept in 38 hours by the time the assessment was complete. I noted this in the log and kept working. Sophie harvested the greenhouse on day 39. She brought the first bowl to breakfast without announcement. A kitchen towel-lined colander of radishes, mixed lettuce, and 3 varieties of herbs. She set it on the table between the coffee and the water pitcher and sat down. Nobody said anything for a moment. The radishes were not remarkable radishes. They were small and somewhat irregular and had the slightly overeager flavor of plants grown in improvised conditions. The lettuce was excellent. The herbs were the herbs, basil and parsley and thyme, still warm from the growing space. And Jerry said, "Pass the radishes." Caleb reached across his father and passed them. Dennis Hartwell, who had been sitting at the far end of the table for 3 weeks with the expression of someone waiting to be told what to do, reached out and took a radish and ate it without any particular ceremony. And something in his posture settled, very slightly for the first time since he had arrived. I wrote in my log, Day 39, first harvest. Note, the quality of a meal is not a function of the food's objective characteristics. Note for future reference. Carla's team had completed the data transmission on day 37. The Hargrove County ham operator we had reached, a retired electrical engineer in Columbus named Bernard. He's 73 years old and running his station from a basement with remarkable discipline, had relayed the documentation package to a university network contact he maintained from his previous career. The data was out, multiple recipients, multiple servers. Dale could not suppress it. Wren found her envelope on day 40. She found it because she had gone into the superintendent's office to use the work table and noticed it tucked under the edge of the radio equipment. I had forgotten it was there. She read the front, her name in my handwriting, and opened it. She read it. She laughed. Then she came to the kitchen door and said, with an expression I can only describe as accusatory, "You left me maintenance notes." "And an inventory update," I said. You left me a list of things to do. "And a note about Sophie's math sessions." She stood in the doorway for approximately 4 seconds. Then she used a word I will not transcribe here. Then she laughed again. Then, remarkably, she appeared to be crying, which she managed for about 3 seconds before visibly deciding not to. Then she said, "You made me cry. I hate you for that." "I genuinely didn't." "I know you didn't," she said. "That's why it worked." She went back to the workbench. I wrote in the log, "Note, the contents of emergency envelopes should perhaps be reviewed before leaving them to assess emotional impact. Note for future reference." Jerry gave me the log on day 41. It was a standard composition notebook, the marbled black and white kind, and it contained 35 pages of his handwriting. The careful, measured script of a man who had kept records for 30 years and had one particular standard for record keeping. Every significant resource acquisition listed by date and quantity. Every tactical decision described in 2 sentences or fewer. Every personnel addition with the date and the method of arrival and 1 observational note. Every significant outcome. He set it on the counter in front of me without ceremony and said, "In case someone needs to know how it was done." Then he picked up his coffee and went to the window. I looked at the notebook. Then I opened it to the first page. Day 1. 1 person arrived. Decision made to stay. Inventory of primary assets follows. The handwriting was steady throughout. 35 days of steady handwriting. I went to the barn that evening. I checked all the animals one by one. Full examination, the same diagnostic sequence I run when I need to think but cannot sit still. Watson the horse, who had recovered fully from his colic and was operating at his usual combination of anxious and magnificent. The goats, -1. The pigs, who had been neutral parties throughout and remained so. The chickens, who were divided between their perches in the arrangement around still Tyler. Tyler was in the barn. He was sitting with his back against the hay bale with the chickens around him, and he watched me work through the barn with the steady attention he had been showing for 2 weeks. When I got to his end of the barn, I ran the informal assessment I ran every day: eye clarity, response to stimulus, evidence of the gray film recession. And the clarity had improved measurably in the last 5 days. The film was at perhaps 40% of its day 1 density. I sat down on the hay bale beside him. We sat in the barn together. From outside, I could hear Wren working on the fence replacement, the rhythmic sound of a woman doing a thing she knew how to do. I could hear Sophie in the greenhouse, the specific movement of someone working carefully in a small space. On day 42, Tyler said Sophie's name. He said it the way an infant says a word for the first time, the recognition preceding the production, the knowing slightly ahead of the saying. Sophie. 2 syllables, the second softer than the first. He said it while she was writing at the kitchen table and he was eating breakfast across from her. And she looked up, and he said it again, with the specific quality of someone confirming that the sound works. She wrote it down. She wrote the time, the date, the context. She showed me the notebook entry and did not say anything else about it. On day 43, he said my name. I was running the morning livestock check when I heard it. Not immediately recognizable. The phonemes were imprecise, the consonants soft, but unambiguous. Marcus, 2 syllables. From the barn doorway where he was standing with his breakfast plate and the 2 chickens who had apparently become his permanent companions. I turned around. He said it again. The same sound, more confident the second time, the brain and mouth finding the shape of it. He looked at me the way you look at someone whose name you have always known and have just found again after looking for a while. My hands were full of livestock assessment notes. I set them down on the nearest surface and I went to Tyler Breck and I checked his eyes. Reflex clinical habit, I could not have not done it. And I noted the pupil response and the clarity level and the bilateral symmetry and all the things a veterinarian notes when they are assessing neurological recovery, because that is what I do. And I could not stop doing it even here, even now. Then I sat down on the barn floor. Not methodically, not for a specific reason. I sat down on the concrete floor of the exhibition barn with the morning light coming through the high windows and still Tyler standing in the doorway. And I sat there. After a while, Sophie came in and sat beside me. Tyler sat down across from us with his breakfast plate, and the chickens settled around the group in their proprietary way. We sat there for 20 minutes. When Wren came to find me for the morning operational meeting, she stopped in the doorway and looked at the 3 of us on the barn floor. "He said your name," she asked. "He said my name," I confirmed. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then, "How are you feeling?" I thought about this question. I had been feeling in sequence and occasionally simultaneously. Competent, terrified, certain, wrong, right, exhausted, useful, responsible for things I could not control. And most recently, most unexpectedly, something that I did not have the correct clinical term for and would have to log as present and approximately okay. "I'm going to need a moment," I said. She said, "Take your time." She went back to work. And if you're still hearing this, thank you for staying with it. I'm recording this on day 46. The operational situation, 12 people plus 1 recovering patient in a 47-acre facility that is, by any rational measure, functioning. The greenhouse is producing. The livestock are healthy, minus 1 goat whose loss I have noted appropriately. The perimeter is solid. We have 47 days of supplemental food in the canning storage, 30 days of staple calories from our own production, and an agricultural expansion plan that should extend that significantly. Still, Tyler is learning new words at a rate of approximately 1 to 2 per day. Dale Pryor is still out there. The county is still infected. The transmission I sent via Bernard in Columbus has been received and redistributed. But I have no way of knowing yet what happens with it. No cavalry has arrived. I did not expect cavalry. The world is still the world. It is a different world than it was 46 days ago. But it is still governed by the same physics and the same human instincts and the same basic calculus of resources and threats and decisions and their consequences. Here is what I know now that I did not know on day 1. I know that the hardest resource to manage is not food or water or ammunition. It is the decision about who eats, who receives treatment, who gets let in the gate. I had a protocol for this. The protocol was correct in its structure and insufficient in its acknowledgement of what executing it costs. I know that the most important preparation is not the physical stockpile. It is the habit of observation. The specific practice of noticing everything and filing it, without always knowing why you're filing it, trusting that the filing will be useful when the moment comes. You cannot build this habit in 48 hours. It takes years. I know that my skills as a veterinarian were more directly applicable to a prion pandemic than anything in the human medicine curriculum, which is either remarkable luck or the universe making an extremely dry joke at significant expense. I have not fully decided which. I know that children's brains are more capable than we act like they are. that people who have spent decades doing one thing become extraordinary under specific conditions, that the person you expect to be useless is often the person who saves your life, even that a 9-year-old boy's decision to stand between a group of armed men and a barn is not less meaningful because he can't fully explain why he did it. I know that the Fairground works. 47 acres of chain link and commercial kitchen and Ferris wheel and canning jars, and it works. Not because the resources were special, because the decisions in the first 72 hours were made with clear information and clear priorities, and a willingness to do the next thing without waiting to feel ready. I have logged all of it. I will keep transmitting. If you're somewhere that's working, if you found your version of the Fairground, whatever it looks like, transmit back. We're trying to build a map of what's functional and where, not only for strategic reasons, though there are strategic reasons, and because isolation is a resource drain and community is a resource, and we need to act like that's true even across 40 miles of infected county. If you have veterinary supplies, large animal, small animal, any grade, we are actively interested in trading. Ask for Marcus. There is one more thing. This morning, at approximately 7:15, still Tyler came into the commercial kitchen for breakfast. He sat down across from Sophie. He ate the bread she pushed across the table. The chickens arranged themselves around the chair legs. He looked up at Ren, who was at the workbench and who had been leaving food out for him every morning for 2 weeks while maintaining that she was not doing this. He said, "Ren." She set down the wrench she was holding. She picked it up again. She set it down again. Then he looked around the kitchen. Sophie. Jerry at the coffee station. Dennis and Lisa near the door. Caleb and Kevin by the window. Carla's team at the far table. The full population of the Fairground assembled for morning logistics. He looked at each person. He said slowly, working through the list the way a student reads a paragraph he's seeing for the first time. Sophie. Gary, Lisa, Marcus. He knew us. He knew our names and he said them, and he looked at each of us when he said them, and it was not a dramatic moment in the way that dramatic moments are usually written. It was small. It was quiet. It was a 9-year-old boy in a Minecraft shirt eating bread in a commercial kitchen inside a county fairground inside a world that had ended 35 days ago, saying the names of people he knew. I checked his eyes. Reflex. The clarity was at approximately 60% of full. The gray was receding. Sophie wrote it down. Old Jerry said, "Well." He poured himself another coffee. Outside, the PA system played a brief run of Carnival of Venice, Ren testing the speaker system after the repair. And somewhere in the parking lot beyond the fence, a small cluster of infected moved toward the sound, and the Ferris wheel caught the morning light, and the chickens complained loudly about the music's sudden volume. And still Tyler looked at all of us, and we looked at him, and the world was still the world, and we were still in it. Closed for the season, reopened for survival. Come find us if you can. This is Marcus Webb, Hargrove County Fairgrounds, transmitting on frequency 7.250. I will be here. End.